Cryostasis is an action horror FPS that takes place aboard a ship encased in ice. The inhabitants vaguely look like zombies and you have a gun. There's also some weird stuff going on. Survive and figure out what happened to the ship and its crew. And that does sound like a good premise, right? Because it is. But there's a lot of weird stuff to cover. Like level design more reminiscent of floor plans. Or maybe gunplay that reminds me that I actually have work tomorrow. Or perhaps just maybe a narrative so deficient in narrative stuff that it barely registers as a narrative. Or maybe it's the game's weird tech demo-ness. Because it is one of the only games in existence to utilize the PhysX water physics system. A technology from a bygone age. It doesn't really mean much for gameplay though. It just means that my frame rate just tanks if water's visible on the screen and, well, it's a boat. So yeah. Get used to seeing a lot of like 1 frame per second gameplay in this video, and I'm very sorry, but there is no way around that here. Fun fact though, we did actually check out this developer a few years back. Action Forms were the guys and girls that made Vivisector Beast Within, that really flawed but highly inventive shooter, so maybe Cryostasis will follow in its footsteps. But to see that, we're going to have to start at the start, aren't we?
There lived a tribe of people in a place that was bounded on 3 sides.
We open with an extended monologue from an older woman who regales us with the story of an ancient tribal community who were forced to flee their village and escape through an even more ancient forest.
And wherever they reached those waters, poisonous vapors arose, and the people began to get sick and die.
The only caveat being that the forest is seemingly alive and also a toxic bog. Rough gig.
So they sat pondering their fate through the long nights, with the poisonous vapors rising around them, and the forest singing its mournful song. And the shadows of the fires leaped about them in a soundless dance, and it seemed as if it weren't mere shadows dancing, but the evil spirits of forest and bog.
Many people die and the story is left unclear as to what happened. Did they perish? Did they survive? Well, considering that our protagonist just has some papers that the lady's monologuing over, I think they might have. We awaken at the bottom of the pit, we're freezing, and we're alone in what I can only describe as an unforgiving metallic wasteland. Our hand pops up, we right click, and the hatch opens. The ice shatters, like it really shatters. It even makes the frame rate dip a little. Damn, really does shatter. PhysX. We shake our flashlight and I expect a spooky to pop up. But no, nothing here. Okay then. And if I touch it, I get to see the path, I think. The guy must have fallen down here, then froze to death, and then got rematerialized by God, I guess? It's the polar circle, shit's kinda weird up here. In reality though, we actually find a series of bodies in the next few rooms that paint a picture. Someone was going to meet up with this boat on this dog sled, but the ice splits and they get trapped in it. And turns out this guy is actually called Alexander Nezerov, a research assistant who was on his way home from work, I guess. We then turn on the generator, but a strange frozen man is stopping us from progressing. The ship rumbles around as the ship roars back to life, at least in our little section. In the next room over though, a flashback of 2 crewmen heating up by a fire plays out.
How is it going?
The cans are in place. No sign yet.
Sit down. Warm up while it burns. I've brought 2 more crates to dry. Sit down. Warm up while it burns.
And this is the game's way of telling us to warm up and get some health back. This is largely how healing works, and it's okay. But we'll get back to that because, well, this guy's trying to kill us now. flee into the generator room and the ghostly figure is now gone, but then quickly teleports behind us and chases us through another room. We take a lock and chain from the door, our first melee weapon, and it shuts behind us. Breaks his planks, this guy drowns to death. He then comes back and tries to fight us. We do engage him in a quick fight. Again, more on that later. We then hit up by a light bulb, and yeah, I might take this out of the way now. Light bulbs aren't very hot, you know. But as you'll see, apparently they're hot enough to reverse hypothermia. So, yeah. We fight some more guys, and then we just come across this guy just kind of chilling here. We reach out and touch him, and now we are him.
Through the door and up the stairs, quickly! It won't hold much longer!
And now all of a sudden, the visions from earlier kinda make sense, don't they? We somehow have an ability to reach back in time and change someone's fate. The game calls these mental echoes, and they're pretty cool, truth be told. But in terms of the narrative, it would appear that we went back in time and saved ourselves from death, or maybe we're just viewing how we did die and now we're a reanimated corpse or something? I don't really know. But I'm here for the ride, and what is life if not full of mysteries? So we'll roll with it for now, I'm sure the game will explain itself, right? Right? With our character's cool goggles finally being revealed to the whole world, and with the story planting seeds of intrigue into your noggins, I'm gonna do what I always do and jump ship to gameplay. Because it's gonna be a weird one today. So apparently Cryostasis is like a horror action shooter. Fuck alright. So in my mind, it only seems appropriate to talk about the spookies first. So is Cryostasis actually a scary game? No, not really, despite the game loving to throw jump scares at you. I mean, for example, the axe guy from earlier literally just spawns in behind you for no reason. Or this guy who just kind of spawns in behind a corner. Why? Because it's spooky, and jump scares were all the rage back then. It feels kind of misleading though, because Cryostasis isn't a wall-to-wall jump scare like the early game would lead you to believe. Cryostasis is the definition of a slow burn. It's unsettling, it's creepy, and it does work for the most part. I never really jumped out of my seat, but I wasn't really comfortable either. Sure, you could credit this to how creepy the game looks, with its empty claustrophobic rooms, and the enemies' designs kind of drawing inspiration from Silent Hill more than anything else, both in look and in narrative reasoning. But much like Silent Hill, Cryostasis is immensely atmospheric. We spend so long just walking around and opening doors, all while the ship creaks around us. It is kind of unsettling at times, as this is a foreign place to all but sailors. I've never been in the bowels of a ship before. I didn't know it could feel so small. And because I really don't know how the fuck a ship operates, these rooms just feel alien. I don't know what this does, and I probably never will, but I need to use these rooms to survive. It's one of these things that this game does really well. You feel so immersed in the ship, even though you don't know how it functions or how best to navigate it. So when the creatures just start showing up, you have to start learning the rules of this world and how best to deal with what lies in front of you. A lot of this learning comes down to the flashbacks, which kind of function as learning tools on how to use a weapon or what certain buttons do what. The important part though is that they help familiarise us with the ship overall. We get to see the ship in its prime, the crew relaxing, the crew responding to a threat, and we even get to see the hierarchy of command. Even if we never really get to meet any of these people or learn who they are, we do get the sense that the ship has been through a lot, and so has its crew, which makes the journey through its cold rooms that much more somber. And maybe I'm reading into this too much, I do have a tendency to, if you've ever watched any of my videos, but it's really interesting to contrast and compare a place built for humans and what it feels and looks like when it's transformed into just another chunk of frozen earth. A fact that this game wants to drive home is nearly every action you make disturbs the ship's sleep. Opening a door sends chunks of ice just shattering to the floor. Turning on the lights to a room causes the ice to melt away. It's almost like you're reviving the ship, burning away whatever evil hides in the dark corners of the earth. The decision to visualize health as heat only adds to this. There's a creeping anxiety when you realize that your health is nearly always dropping. Slowly, sure, but it's enough to make you search for sources of heat to heal from. It adds a little bit of tension, which is always appreciative. Is it weird that light bulbs put out enough heat to reverse hypothermia and somehow radiate more heat than a fire or a generator? Yes. but I kind of get why they did it. It would be weird to have open fires in every room, especially since the humans on board are long gone. Plus, it kind of makes more sense to link the traditional safety of light in horror games in real life to your health. It's kind of smart, actually. The game even goes out of its way to make sure you know that these safe rooms are not always safe. It only happens a couple times during the game, but it's enough to keep the tension up. Another nice touch is that heat sources, interactive buttons and switches, they all glow red. It makes them really easy to identify from a distance and also contrasts nicely with the overwhelming amount of blue and white present in the game. It's always good when a game has a consistent use of colour, especially when they know when and how to break it. One of my absolute favourite things this game does is that the mental echoes or the flashbacks are presented in full colour. Is it kinda washed out? Sure, but it's far more colourful than the rest of the game by a long shot, and as previously mentioned, this makes the juxtaposition between the frozen ship and the non-frozen ship that much more interesting, and really drives home that this ship isn't safe anymore. Pretty much all of Cryostasis takes place on board the Northwind, a USSR-operated nuclear icebreaker en route to Siberia to drop off prisoners. This game is set on a ship. What are ships known for? Well, it's not their architectural variety. Cryostasis is, perhaps by limitations of its setting, the very definition of a corridor shooter. Nearly every room looks nigh identical, and the few that try to do something different completely fail and come off as detached and devoid of function aboard the ship. To be honest, it's boring and uninspired, and it does add to the atmosphere and tension far more than it has any right to. You can't tell me that creeping around a realistically modelled ship occupied by strange creatures isn't an amazing proposition, especially when it seems like you aren't going anywhere. It's almost like you're stuck in the same part of the ship and you can't get out. Whether this is by design or not is up in the air, but the effect isn't. The effect is great. Sure, encountering very similar rooms 10 times in a row is a little brain numbing, but I feel like it's a good thing for the game overall. Cryostasis commits very early on to keeping things as grounded as they can be without sacrificing their design goals. And I just like it when a dev team gets to make a game they want to make. But I can't help but want more from Cryostasis' level design. Sure, there are levels that made me go, holy fucking shit, that is fucking awesome. But at the same time, I can only wander through so many of the same feeling rooms before I start to wonder if this is all the game is. And once a player starts to think like that, it's hard to pull them back. Like, here's a few things, for example, they could have done, all without sacrificing their realistic design goals. I'm really surprised that there isn't a dedicated section to us diving below or around the ship, excluding that one flashback. I'm surprised we never get off the boat to explore the nearby ice fields, apart from that one ice flashback section that has us controlling a polar bear. I'm surprised we don't even get to visit the iceberg which apparently caused the ship to get immobilized. It's also just surprising to me that Cryostasis doesn't have an escort mission somewhere. Which I know, I don't really like them, but the time this game was made, they were in nearly every game. Plus, this game is all about saving people aboard a ship, so it's odd we never get to see another living human being outside of the flashbacks. To be fair, well, there is one part where we do get to see something which is vaguely human. It's a great little section, and it's probably the game's best spook, but I won't go into it here. We kind of just stay on the ship, going room to room, turning on lights, and I liked it well enough, but I just wanted more from Cryostasis. It's not often that you get a ship set on a frozen over icebreaker. In fact, it's probably one of the only horror games set fully on a boat. I know of Cold Fear and this. That's it. So, is it disappointing that the game set on a ship looks like a ship? Yeah, weirdly enough. But it does work, and it did keep me immersed for the 6 or so hour long time, but we haven't really touched on gameplay yet, which I know is odd. So how is the actual level design in terms of gameplay? This game does something really interesting. Your movement speed in this game is so sluggish that these tiny rooms feel massive. It takes a relatively long time to cross a room at a walking space, and this is both a complaint and a compliment towards the game. You aren't some buff space marine looking fella, right? You're a researcher wearing 5 layers of clothes and carrying God knows what. Oh, and you're freezing to death. So yeah, you're going to be slow and clunky. But at the same time, it can be really boring with multiple rooms in a row don't feature anything but walking and maybe hitting a button. You can claim it's atmospheric, and you're right, it is atmospheric, but it's also so fucking boring. Sure, you can try sprinting across the rooms, but your character is straight up asthmatic, and the sprint is actually not that much faster than walking. It mainly has uses in combat as opposed to traversal, which is totally fine. This does make the game feel slow, which makes the game sound boring, and it isn't always, but it does have a decent amount of tedium as you navigate very samey rooms. But a lot of these rooms are designed well. They're designed around choke points, and seeing as the game has a heavy preference to spawning enemies around corners or out of a cupboard, the tension remains reasonably high for the runtime. The game spawns in enemies in a lot of different ways, some are used a lot more than others, leading once again to tedium, but some are unique or seldomly used. So it still works and it still feels fresh for the most part. But I do suppose we should actually touch on combat sooner or later, seeing as that is the bulk of the game. I also just want to briefly touch on PhysX before we jump into combat, because this is more of a warning that it is like a part of the review. PhysX is really not worth the performance hit. Sure, the water looks amazing. The physically accurate sparks flying from a bullet hit looks great, but it's not enough to warrant the performance cost of PhysX. And seeing as this game is so woefully unoptimized that even in 2023, a 3070 isn't enough to maintain 60 FPS, I would recommend leaving it off. There is a really good video on YouTube that highlights the changes from PhysX on to PhysX off, and the only real difference to me is that the water gun actually fires water and not a shitty looking particle effect. That's really it. There's just more water and more fancy sparks, and if that is important, sure, play with it on. I did, and it was playable, but some parts are just awful. And the OBS, like, encoding engine, I guess, kept crashing whenever there was a PhysX heavy, like, element of the game. So I do just have missing footage, which I'm sure will be a pain in the ass later. Talking about misery, though, the combat. And yes, I will preface this with atmosphere. The game is trying to be atmospheric, and it succeeds most of the time, but Jesus fucking Christ, the combat is terrible. The first bit of combat in this game is melee. It's throwing punches at a human icicle and hoping for the best. But once you realise that blocking does nothing and the best strategy is just the backpedal and punch, it becomes laughably easy. This is what the first hour or so looks like. And then you get a Mosin, and the game quickly swaps from atmospheric horror game to a subpar shooter. Enemies fire during their reloading animations. They roll around like they just had red cordial. They take multiple hits from a rifle that takes you multiple seconds to bolt. And the game decides that when you ADS, you should zoom in about 400% and try to make me vomit. It's funny though, because you don't really need to zoom in that much because the rooms are about 5 meters wide. You could hit fire and hit enemies reliably. So forgive my fucking confusing when the game hands me a scoped Mosin an hour later and expects me to use it. Because why the fuck would I use what I believe to be a 6x scope in a room where I could throw my shoe and score a headshot? You have to question why they added it in the first place. It doesn't serve a purpose in this current build of the game. So maybe once upon a time it did serve a purpose. And maybe they just went, okay, well we spent so much time on getting this to work, maybe we should just add it so all that work was at least for something. But at the same time, this is also a game that, 99% of the combat encounters happen in close quarters, and we don't have a shotgun or even a pistol. So that's fucking weird. A shotgun is a staple of horror shooters, but there isn't one here. I can understand that maybe they thought the ship wouldn't have one on board, so once again we're thinking about their realistic design goals, but the ship is carrying prisoners. A shotgun seems important to maintaining security on a ship like that. Sure, realism I guess, but you can't hide behind realism when the game has a water gun that uses icicles and ammo. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So, something I complain about a lot in these videos is pacing. And Cryostasis is no exception here. The game starts out with some minor fisting, some fisticuffs, and then moves on to bolt action rifles that encourage a more slower, more precise type of game. And then we get a PPSH submachine gun that immediately becomes the only weapon you use for the entire second half of the game. It also has the added bonus, I guess, of changing the slow deliberate shooting of the first half into what I can only describe as run and gun shooting. The PPSH is also the only weapon worth bothering with, as its rate of fire and DPS is just so much higher. It doesn't even suffer from the usual balancing that would take place in a game like Cryostasis. It is still accurate and still deadly at range. And by range, I mean 6 to 10 meters, which is about as wide as a room can get aboard a ship, so range is a non-issue here. You would think that having bolt-action rifles and later an SBT, a semi-automatic rifle, would translate to relating players for accuracy, but no. It still takes 4 to 5 shots to down most enemies regardless of where you land your shot. And the PPSH can just do that so much better than any of the other rifles, so it's the clear winner. And yeah, there's also the water gun, which is amazing, but it does feel like cheating to me because it was added in an update, which was solely to show off the PhysX effects, so I didn't really use it. Plus the performance hit from using it is just fucking incredible. You would think that maybe the game would balance by making enemies do heaps of damage, but no. The high damage output from enemies doesn't make the game difficult because you can heal in every single fucking room. I only died a few times over the course of the game, and it was mostly due to mini-bosses just spawning on top of me and instantly fucking me to death. The main problem with combat is that it's one of the two ways the players interact with the game. We push buttons and we shoot people. Pushing buttons is very dull because how the fuck do you make it exciting, right? But shooting people? We have an entire genre for just that. And Cryostasis, to be fair, does have an okay gun feel. But the way in which we use its guns is very bland and very just, I don't want to say boring, but uneventful. Combat is intense because every encounter goes the same way. You have too much health. Enemies have too much health. There's no feeling of danger because you always have ammo. The game actually seems engineered to always give you enough ammo before an encounter, which is strange for a survival horror game. But also at the same time, it's only really a survival horror game for the first hour or so. So maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong angle. But even if I look at it from the angle of a shooter, I still don't think it works because the gunplay isn't action focused. Reloads are slow. Most weapons are bolt action, apart from the PPSH as we've just said. It feels like the outlier, and it's treated like the outlier as ammo is fairly uncommon for it, and thus you aren't encouraged to use it on every enemy but rather mini-bosses or groups of enemies. This just seems like the only bit of balancing that was done to the weapons. It actually reminds me a lot of Dark Corners of the Earth. A good game overall, but it has some weirdly underdeveloped and poorly thought out aspects that make the experience poor at times. But if I was asked how I would balance Cryostasis, I would do this. Up the damage of the rifles and lower the amount of ammo present for the PPSH even further than it already is. This means you can use the rifles for longer in the game while the PPSH maintains its usefulness, but now you will try and reserve ammo for tougher enemies. It might even be a good idea just to up the recoil on it so it's less effective at range, thus making the rifles far more important and relevant, throughout the entire game as opposed to just the first 2 or so hours. What about the enemies? Well, again, it's extremely mixed for me. The designs are cool. We have basic melee mutants who will punch you or try to axe you to death. But then we pick up a gun and now our mutant friends have rifles. This machine gunner with a really cool effect on his face. And then we get this big fucker with dual SMGs with dual magazines. We have a spider boss, some dogs, and... So there is a lot of variety, and seeing as the game is only 6 hours long, that's a lot of variety over a short game, which is really good to see. But, in a minute, you knew there was a but coming. There is no difference in how these enemies actually function type to type. If they're melee enemies, they will just rush you. If they have a gun, they'll probably still try to rush you. With the exception being the riflemen, who more or less seemingly stay anchored to their spawn point. This, however, does make for one of the game's best mental echoes as you have to dive from cover to cover as a crewmate tries to shoot you down. Despite there being a lot of variety in design, and I do think some of these look really fucking cool, they are the same in gameplay. It's just annoying because I do believe that the enemies look great. The visuals aren't everything, and with the lackluster weapons combined with dumb as shit AI, the experience is just left feeling repetitive and dull. Like, I began to tire of it really early on. But I did stick with it, and I am happy I stuck with it. The amount of unique set pieces, be it for mental echoes or not, is excellent and help keep the adventure from bottom deck to top deck interesting. And that's kinda all for gameplay, because This game's pretty basic, all things considered. Guess what, we're just going to talk about the narrative now, and unlike most suffering throughs, we will not be going through chronologically, because nothing happens with the narrative. It is a slow burn, and by slow burn I mean most of the burn happens in the last 10 minutes of the game. So, yeah, let's see what I do with this section, eh? After we finish staring out into the frozen wasteland around us with our really cool goggles, we flash back to the captain and his first mate. They're having an argument. The Northwind is equipped with these state-of-the-art equipment to detect icebergs and thick ice sheets. Sheets they can't pierce through. So the first captain goes like, yeah, the ice, it's too thick to smash through and we need to go around, but the captain says no. It's his ship and his crew. He knows what the ship can do and he won't listen to some silly bit of equipment. The captain and the first mate are effectively the most pivotal characters when discussing what happened to the Northwind. The captain focuses on his gut feelings and experiences, whereas the first mate follows technology and scientific analysis. This is the core of the pre-frozen ship conflict, and is largely what the game is about. Your goal is to get to the top of the ship and see if you can't fix whatever caused the ship to get stuck. Along the way, you run into corpses who you then save, but you never meet them despite the fact they should be alive now, right? I mean, we stopped whatever killed them, be it water, creatures, or someone else's mistakes. They should be alive. A lot of the early memory echoes are of various low-level crew members trying to escape the flooding ship or doing their best to save who they can. A cool one early on is about a crewman hopping into a diving suit to help reinforce the hull, all while getting stalked by a mutant who tries to attack us. So you would think this is about teaching the player that the water isn't safe, so that when we're on our boat, just after this we're being careful and watching for enemies, but no, nothing happens. We're kind of just on a boat looking around, so sure, it's atmospheric, I can't deny that, but it feels like we got taken out of the atmospheric moment so we can go diving to then set up that the enemies can hide in the water only to never have that happen. It's weird, let's say wanted to set up a scare only to like subvert expectations, but I don't think that's the point. We just do the same sequence again but with different color grading. The mental echoes are a really cool idea, but they aren't implemented well. The grand majority of them just come down to hitting a button to open a door in the future. Like, it's fine, it works, and it is made more forgivable because of the few outstanding flashbacks we do get. Like fending off escaping prisoners while a helicopter flies away, or hell, even the diving suit sequence. Some of them really make me wish that the game was just set during the boat's descent into the chaos, rather than the aftermath. For example, we swap out a fuel rod in the reactor, noting that it's the last rod they have, so eventually power is going to run out. We fight off some mutants in a canteen. We witness the ship's doctor's response to the initial wave of injuries, and how he's just throwing anything at the problem to fix it. I find this stuff more interesting in terms of gameplay scenarios than what we have in the finished product. But we aren't here to evaluate what could have been, but rather what is here. So placing the mental echoes back into the context of the finished game, they are ultimately gameplay set pieces attached to quality world building. But, and you knew it was coming, there is no context for who these people are. And it is hard to get affected by these because we just have no one to care about, or really just to know. Sure, you could say that the ship and its crew as a whole are the character here, but we don't know anything about the ship or its crew. We have some hints here and there. We know some of the troubles that the leading personnel have between each other, but it never goes much deeper than that. We still don't know where we are, who these people are, or what the objective is. It's devoid of the context needed to enforce the gameplay and or the narrative. It's cool to wander around a ship, but why are we doing it? I can gather from the general direction of the game that I am slowly climbing up from the bows of the ship, but again, to what end? Is it for the bridge? Maybe there's a radio I can use, or maybe it's for an opportunity to reach the outside and get off the ship. Well, no, I don't know, we're just moving up the ship because we can, I guess. I just don't really know. And yeah, it's a weird thing to complain about because this game is clearly focused on atmosphere. But imagine Silent Hill if we didn't know that Cheryl Mason was Harry's daughter. But to be fair, the game does make an effort with some parts of the crew. We do know the captain and the first mate. We don't know their names, and their sole characterization is technology good, technology bad, which, again, isn't enough to give us a reason to care. But the game is trying? But it's odd because the game's core conflict is us going back in time and saving someone from death. Someone we don't know, so there's no emotional stake there. We also never see anyone alive, they're all dead, and that's not exactly a good way to build character. Combine this with the dull level design and you have a perfect idea of how this game progresses. Press a button, fight an enemy, time travel, save some guy we don't know so the door's open, and rinse and repeat like 50 fucking times to the credits roll. It's just boring. The general idea in terms of progression is that we're slowly making our way up from the more utility-focused lower decks to the residential middle decks and up to the top decks and then finally the bridge. But we spend so long in the same rooms that this change barely registers. And you could say this is an attempt at showcasing a kind of purgatory where nothing happens, to try and make out with the ship's bows of this steel and iron maze of rooms. Only someone who was experienced at navigating it could make out the difference. And seeing as we are playing as an outsider, maybe that is the point, but I don't think that tracks unless you reinforce it through the narrative more than just the opening sequence. And I know a lot of people who play this game they're not going to care about this. It is a very me thing to be annoyed at, especially since I can almost guarantee that Action Forms wanted this ship to come off as this otherworldly Leviathan. And if that was the intention, it does work, and it works extremely well. I mean, for example, there's something that Cryostasis does that was just incredibly impactful for reasons I don't even understand. There is a repeating visual motif of the destroyed nuclear reactor. It's kind of used to signify just how far we've come. As early on we walk above its destroyed core, we see its red streaks scorched into the ground, and then later in the game, near the end in fact, we are walking high above it. It's a really cool visual which made me go, wow, that's cool. It's simple, but it works to connect the start of the journey to the end of the journey, and once again, colour. It's red, it's heat, and we're further away from it now. Was this me getting immersive in the game? Was this my brain going red against blue equals cool? I don't know. None of this poetic extrapolation of the developer's design really helps the fact that I don't know what I'm doing. Am I meant to survive? Am I looking for survivors? Am I fixing the ship? Why did people become monsters? Why are we able to change people's fates? And quite simply, this is Cryostasis' biggest issue. The player is left wanting, not from its gameplay, but its story. The lack of context for literally anything. The game is just hitting buttons and hoping it progresses what little story there is in some meaningful way. It doesn't help that the buttons don't even seem to have functions that are believable. The amount of times you hit a button on the opposite side of the room to lower a ladder or open a door is at least in the low 20s, which is too much for a 6-hour game. It feels grating to do this over and over again. It feels gamey, for lack of a better word, and that is a strange thing for Cryostasis to do. That being said, I do have to admit, I did like slowly climbing my way up the ship. I liked seeing the design change from strictly utilitarian to more of a communal setting. That was nice. I know I keep saying that it makes the juxtaposition between the ship now and the ship before the accident much more impactful, but it really does. It's just a shame that we don't know any of the crew. Maybe this isn't a universal reaction. I do have this weird fascination with nautical travel. I think there's something so oddly charming about it, but also terrifying. Cryostasis on paper has everything that it needs to make me absolutely engaged. But nothing happens. It's an odd comparison to make, but I recently played The Return of Obra Dinn, a game about solving what happened to a boat, and no spoilers, don't worry. I was just fascinated with how two games can handle a relatively similar subplot, but one works flawlessly and one struggles to even get started. Sure, a lot of this comes down to the games having different focuses. One's a horror shooter, the other's like a mystery detective game. So yeah, one of them will obviously have a greater focus on story, but you can do a lot with just atmosphere and environments to tell a story. But Cryostasis doesn't do any of that. We're still hitting buttons to turn on lights to replenish our health. We're still encountering dead people that we don't know and saving them from death only for them not to appear or really change anything other than a door being open. But to be fair, I did start off this section by saying, oh, we'll talk about the narrative, and we haven't even talked about the narrative yet, so shall we? Well, yeah, I've been stepping over and around it for the last few thousand words, and the honest truth is, The narrative just kind of fucks off through that, for the entire game. We get that bit where the first mate and captain talk, and then we go hit buttons and fight people for like 5 hours. We get a few flashbacks to hint what happened, a talk between the captain and his engineering officer, some out of context flashbacks of a helicopter leaving the ship, prisoners trying to escape, only to realize they literally haven't. So they just go back to their cells, which is a really fucked up thing, but my god is it good. These flashbacks are, at their core, storytelling moments to reinforce just how fast the ice consumed the ship and its crew, and how we are slowly undoing it, rescuing person after person, slowly restoring power and heat to the ship, melting away the ice. But there's a problem here. These flashbacks aren't really hinting at how we're going to solve our problem. You know, how do we get home? We aren't really progressing the narrative through them, but rather we keep hitting the same wall. We don't know what we're meant to be doing. I just kept expecting to run into another human who could tell me what was going on, but nothing. So eventually we reached the top of the ship, and I just feel like the game kind of remembered it had to put a neat bow on the story and make sense of those out-of-context flashbacks. So, in a series of final flashbacks, we get to see the 3 lead officers of the ship leave the crew behind. The engineering officer, the captain, and the first mate all flee on a helicopter, and because they left, we can't use their bodies to rectify their mistakes. We're stuck here. The problems that caused the ship to smash into the ice lie solely on them. The captain lacked the confidence to order his crew. The first mate, sick of this captain's inability to lead, starts a coup aboard the ship, and using his newfound power, takes control with the help of the engineering officer. And this is what led to the captain making a last-second decision to ram the icebergs in hopes of just shattering through it, with the first mate then commandeering the ship and forcing the crew to reverse, a dangerous maneuver that causes the reactor to overheat and leak radiation to the ship. And over the course of what it must have been months, the iceberg slowly begins to grow around the ship, eventually breaking into the ship, and I guess the combination of radiation and ice caused people to rapidly mutate into creatures that could withstand their new habitat, I guess? But if you remember back at the start of the game, the narrated drawings from a poem by Maxim Gorky, which detailed a tribe's descent into madness after being pushed out of the village, and how their leader Danko tried to lead his people, but slowly they turned against him. Well, it shouldn't be too much of a stretch to apply this to the captain. The captain is Danko, and the game is trying to pull off some prophesized hero thing that doesn't really make a lot of sense to the game's last few minutes. So, that's cool, I guess. But there's more that I've left out, because I didn't really know where to put it, because it's odd. Somewhere during the game's middle hours in the mid-deck, we reach a room that has a massive frozen sphere that kinda looks like Earth because it is. This is where I went, okay, fuck, this game has a lot more to it than I thought. So I stared at this for a little while and spent the rest of the game trying to fit it into context. And for context, this is the first time we witness anything besides the mental echoes that could be classified as supernatural in any way. It's also just kinda dropped on us and then never brought up again. I spent the rest of the game trying to fit it into the game's themes. Was it commentary on social connections? If we don't stop it here, will it spread? Is the ice God? Is the ice alive? Is the ice our hatred for nature? I don't know. It could be anything, right? Like, what the fuck are you meant to make of this? It's a giant frozen Earth. There is no context for why it's here. It is an absolute mystery. Sure, we're on a boat filled with mutated sailors and we have the ability to time travel, but this is, weirdly enough, it's just a different kind of development narratively. Cryostasis isn't a game that just throws stuff at the wall because it looks cool. Everything so far has had a purpose, but this doesn't. At least one I could find back then. Especially since the game carries on without any chance of reflection. I quickly dropped any intrigue I had as I was just back to shooting people in saming rooms. So once we're on the flight deck, all of a sudden, the captain just starts muttering some Bible verses from Ecclesiastes, a book written by some prophet back in Jesus' times, which can be loosely summed up as everything is meaningless. A very nihilistic approach to life, but an approach all the same. It features such cool things such as everyone you know will die and so will you. Life is random, and you only live for a blink of time in the vastness of the universe. Religious types take this to mean that you should live in the moment whilst also being fearful of your god, but I take it as someone he had like a bad few weeks and wrote a book about how life sucks. applying this to cryostasis is like applying a fucking pair of clamps to my balls. It doesn't really help. We know that the ship and the crew are having a bad day. This is a bleak place. It's a horrible series of events, and I guess it makes sense for the captain to try and find comfort in the words of a nihilistic prophet, but still, it comes out of nowhere and barely makes sense.
In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow down, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look out of the windows shall be darkened. And the doors shall be shut in the street, when the sound of the grinding is low. And one shall rise to the song of a bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low.
Why are we hearing the captain now? It's not within a mental echo, it's just here, like something's calling out to us. My opinion, though, is that the devs kind of realized they didn't have a leg up in the narrative department. So they did what a lot of narrative games did and still do. They leaned on religion to provide their narrative depth. It's inserting God at the last minute to shroud the game's themes in meaning. But it doesn't have meaning. It's the illusion of being deeper than it really is. So, when I touch this weird, random fucking magical orb, I really want you to take a second or two here just to think about what's happened in the game so far. We've woken up, seen past versions of ourselves die in different ways, travelled back in time to save heaps of people, and now the god is talking about life between earth and heaven. Okay, so it's a story about mistakes and about death. Fair enough. So what will happen when I interact with the orb? Will I finally get the answers I crave? No. No, I won't. Because brace yourself, I'm being deadly serious here, the Greek titan Kronos emerges from the ship, and now we know why the ship is the way it is. It's not radiation mutating the crew, it's the Greek titan Kronos, because sure, that makes sense. The helicopter, containing the captain, first mate, and engineering officer never actually left. So once again, we're at a standstill, but now we're against a god who might also be a nuclear reactor, but also Christian god? I don't really know. But he invites us to a cheeky challenge, because of course he does. If we manage to kill more enemies than him, he'll let us go back in time and fix the crew's mistakes. So I say, yeah, fuck it, why not? And I start the most boring boss fight of the last decade. We fire these little balls of energy at enemies. If we kill more than Kronos, you win. And, Kronos can also kill you, which seems a little unfair, but hey, what would I know? I just have some cool fucking goggles, right? So after a while, I do eventually win, and I am sent to the Nether Realm to decide what officer to possess. I decided on the engineering officer, unbeknownst to myself. I just literally didn't know what any of them looked like. The engineering officer, instead of berating the captain and calling him an idiot after the coup starts, instead goes over to a shelf and grabs a model of the ship and gives it to the captain, which provides the captain the self-confidence he needs to commit to his plan and ram the ice, I guess? It is really odd that the way that we free a bunch of Soviet sailors from Kronos, the Greek titan of time, is by giving a guy some self-confidence. It's fucking strange, but it's kinda cool that they kept it grounded in humanity. It's better than us just fighting Kronos and Kronos just fucking off. But it doesn't bring me back to... I don't know anything about this boat and its crew, other than wow, it got cold and now our friends and co-workers are mutants and killing us. The whole god showing up to fix our problems just screams Disney original channel movie, right? Like, it's what we've got, I guess, but I'm not a fan of Kronos being involved at all. Like, it's a cool visual and it's cool on the surface, but it's just weird to top off this story about humanity and survival, especially one that starts with a poem by Maxim Gorky of all people, with God showing up and fixing it for us. Granted, we do have to fight him indirectly, I guess, but still. Kronos being the cause of the mutants is also strange, but hey, whatever, it works, right? It does throw the whole realism angle out the window, but it works. And honestly, I did think the game was going to take a more supernatural approach as the imagery got creepier and creepier and then a frozen earth turned up, but I did not expect a titan from Greek mythology to show up in a Ukrainian game. But finally, the game does end properly with a now friendly crew helping us after we fall down a hole. The old lady from the start monologues us out.
And he rushed forward, holding his flaming heart high above his head to light the way. And the people followed him, as if under a spell.
and then credits roll. But that's not all the game has to offer. It should be obvious to anyone that's played a game from Eastern Europe, particularly Ukraine, that there is a lot to dig into here. From its presentation to its narrative, but most importantly for us now, its themes and its ideas. Early on in the game, we have a mental echo where we have to replace a reactor rod. Reactor Rod 4. It's no coincidence that Action Forms is a Ukrainian studio, a studio whose founding members were teenagers when the Ukrainian Chernobyl disaster happened. And you know, Chernobyl Reactor 4 is the one that exploded and poisoned an entire continent, so I don't think it's a coincidence that it's Reactor Rod 4? Cryostasis canonically takes place in 1981, during the time of the USSR, several years before Chernobyl, but considering the game plays around the time, I wouldn't be shocked if the devs meant for the reactor rod to be some weird pre-designed fate or something. The Northwind is even designed after an Artica class icebreaker, which is, and I will stress this, sometimes referred to as one of the most impressive bits of engineering from the Soviet Union. So bear with me when I say that Cryostasis might just be a criticism of the Soviet Union. There's just too many aspects of the game that align with my theory. It cannot be a mistake. This game is set during the 80s. It has this strong, anti-authority message, and it even focuses around a nuclear disaster that is then likened to a godlike power, which then keeps people in a hell-like purgatory. The whole narrative just focuses around the leadership of the Northwind abandoning their crew when it gets too hard, and that's exactly what the Soviet Union did when times got tough. And look, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I guess I just wanted to make a point that this game is more deep than it seems. The narrative, while fairly simple and basic, does try to make connections to a wider historical context. It isn't clear, but it doesn't need to be. And yeah, this one was a bit quick, wasn't it? At least compared to the average suffering through. I mean, the truth is, the game just doesn't have enough for it. I had to read into this a lot just to get at what I did, but overall, the game is perfectly fine. The focus on atmosphere above all else is what saved the game from being utterly boring. There's something very interesting to me about this game's design, how they wanted so badly to reflect the actual architecture of a Cold War era ship, so they did that, but then they remembered that you have to fit a game in there somehow. So they coupled together what I can only describe as a mediocre horror experience with some excellent visuals, and I still don't know if that's enough for me to recommend it. I would say if this game looks interesting, maybe go download it. It is freeware after all, but if you get bored, just stop and go watch Ragnar's video on it where he breaks down the philosophy and story far better than I ever could. The story and overall mystery of what happened on the ship are the most interesting parts to me, and clearly the many others as well. It is a slow burn realization that not everything is as it seems, and I think that part is one of the only things in Cryostasis that really worked for me. I liked walking around and, gleaming something from the environment that would maybe help me formulate what happened. Even if the crew aren't really characters and no one would ever really predict what the final reveal would be because it's fucking bonkers, which maybe that takes away from it. But Cryostasis is designed to be played, not written about for 3 months and then edited for another 3. Sometimes stuff stands out when you pause it, And that was Cryostasis. Hopefully that's the last Eastern European game for a while because, I don't know, they're fucking depressing.
You've worked with Mr. Jameson in Chile, right?
I don't know.
And when it comes to special operations in Latin America, you are regarded as one of the best.
Fuck's sakes.